So I think we have no time for question and answer, so I leave the floor to Joanna. Joanna is actually leading research in AI, and today, she will actually highlight, as you may have noticed from the provoking title of her presentation, how AI actually has a lot of impact on philosophy, meaning philosophy because we want to stick with philosophy on popular culture. So what we think about ourselves is actually impacted by what those people in AI are developing or discovering. Okay, Joanna, the floor is yours.
All right, hi. Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay, good.
Yes,
all right.
Yes.
So, yes, you already, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. And a special thanks to all the people in the Far East who are watching this at night. I can't believe you guys are staying up for this. How many people have been hearing about AI wiping out the planet? Did you guys hear about Steve Hawking or Nick Bostrom? Like, raise your hand or something. I can't see very well here. Nobody has heard about this? Oh, it's one person in Europe, Plymouth, yeah. Okay, somebody in ETH. Nathan, I'm not seeing as many people as I saw before somehow, but I don't know what's going on. Anyway, well, I see some of you guys. Let's get to it. I don't want to, oh, sorry, wrong slide. First of all, the possibility of artificial intelligence has been used by philosophy for, in a way, longer than it's been a reality. So you could think of Alan Turing. We had a fantastic introduction to the history of AI this morning. But you could think of Alan Turing as coming up with things like the Turing thesis while before there were computers, just thinking about what would it be like if machines could think, if you could have thinking in a machine. And of course, Turing was a mathematician, which isn't exactly philosophy, but it's quite similar. But many philosophers, most famously Dan Dennett, but a lot of people have used artificial intelligence to try to understand what it is to be human. Science fiction writers and a lot also use artificial intelligence and robots quite often to think about and to describe what it means to be human, even though, unfortunately, people sometimes think that's about robots. It's not. It's about humans. Anyway, the point is we have AI. We have had AI for about 50 years now, and it's getting to be all around us. Again, fantastic lecture this morning by Craig talking about how much we already have AI. It's not something that's impossible in the distant future. So what this particular talk, I originally wrote this talk for some philosophers, actually, sociologists and philosophers that were interested in artificial intelligence and its place in the humanities. But I've rewritten it for you guys, so there's 2 new slides. Let's have a look. Here's one of the new slides. It's about the intelligence explosion, which is, there's a philosopher at Oxford named Nick Bostrom, who's quite famous for this, but really people have been talking about it for about 50 years. Can artificial intelligence, will it begin to program itself and then take over the planet the way humans and ants are currently taking over the planet? So that's a concern of a few, as I'm not going to go into it in great detail here. You can actually find me talking about this at length online, why I think it's wrong. But I think it points out the fact that we have to talk to not just lay people, but serious academics from good universities, Oxford and Cambridge, about why are they being so sensationalist. I think this shows that all of us as technologists have an obligation to be able to talk about the social sciences and about the humanities and to understand the role of our own work in our world. Having said all this, I do not want to say that philosophy is, wrong. I don't use it as an insult. I generally use it as a compliment. Let's talk about first the role of the humanities in culture, all right? So science is how we understand the world, and one of the main ways we currently understand the world. What it provides is a description and even an explanation for data, okay? So from this, we can make predictions. So science and artificial intelligence are quite similar. Again, as you heard this morning, that's how you train up AI vision systems too, right? So you can think of science as a kind of intelligence that is run on our society. It's taking observations from nature and giving us predictions about what happens next. But science is not the action selection, okay? Science is the perception. The action selection has to come from somewhere else. The thing that decides what are our priorities, and we call this morality, that comes from our society. Some people think it comes from our religion. In current societies, it comes often from government and from legislation. So our governments decide what our priorities are, and of course every individual decides too what our individual priorities are, but where do we get that information? Part of it is evolved, part of it's from our biology, but part of it is from our culture, what we think, what we were taught by our parents. So we're balancing these sorts of things. So I think it's very important to understand that the humanities allow us to adjust our own priorities and to know ourselves in a different way, whereas science is providing the evidence. And I, you know, there are people in the humanities who think that science is only another narrative that like religion or something else. But no, science is perception. It's grounded in the real world. It's different from religion. It's different from philosophy other than science. Let's talk a little bit more about philosophy. All right. So philosophy is a practice for determining knowledge. So I don't want to say all knowledge comes only from science. One thing is that we also do is reason. And there's certain kinds of reasoning errors people often make. And if you take a philosophy degree, what you do is you get taught, very much like the Confucian system, you get taught a lot of the history of the mistakes people have made in the past and how those mistakes were discovered, usually from things like logical contradiction. All right? So one of the things that philosophy, the main tools now, is basically peer review. I think, yeah. So peer review is a way that, you know, maybe you remember better than I do what we were taught by our professors, and you catch my mistakes for me. Or maybe you just think harder. Or maybe no one person could think of everything, and having 3 reviewers helps us to get closer to the truth. So you can think of the peer review process as fundamentally philosophy. And if you do, then you'll realize that science is still a branch of philosophy. So science came out of philosophy a few centuries ago because we figured out the experimental method. And that's what turned science into perception. That's what's so cool. Now we have something that we can get data. But it doesn't make philosophy archaic. There are still problems, as I described, that are not really scientific problems, but the philosophy can help us reason about. And philosophy, a lot of AI people make the mistakes because they come out of engineering. They make mistakes that philosophy noticed hundreds of years ago, mistakes about what does it mean to be an individual or what could be an ethical priority list, whether there would be contradictions, right? So we need to talk to people from other disciplines. It's an important thing to do. How many people here have already taken a philosophy course at some point? Anyone? Few people. Okay, good. How many people think of themselves primarily as in the humanities or philosophies, and they're taking AI from that perspective? Anyone? Okay, you're about the audience I thought you were then. Okay, good. Okay, so let's get back. Oops, I forgot. The thesis of my talk here is that now we have AI is providing us experimental evidence. So as we get more stuff we can do, we push more stuff from the domain of pure philosophy into science. So the talk, there we go, exciting animation. The talk is about 3 areas that we've now, because of AI, we can now inform philosophical debates. All right, so one is going to be about semantics, basically, language and meaning. And then I'm going to get bolder and go into consciousness and even morality, okay? And the moral obligation I'm going to talk about is specifically to robots. So I will come back into the AI thing. I'm not going to talk about all moral obligation. But the stuff that's best grounded in data is actually the language. So let's get started with that. All right. So how is it that we know, how do we learn as babies what words mean, okay? This may seem really obvious. But if you thought it seemed really obvious, again, you as an AI person should go read Quine, because he points out all the problems with, say that you came from England and went to Australia, and you're talking to a bunch of people who speak a completely language you don't know, and you're pointing at, you're saying, what is that? And you point at something. How do they know what you're asking, right? There's so many different characteristics of, say, a kangaroo. Are you saying a jumping thing, an animal, the grass that's on the other side of the kangaroo? How can they know? But for a long time, this is what people thought, that you showed a lot of examples of a cup or a chair to a child, and that's how they learned what it meant. So here's this. I'm using Terence Deacon because he's a genius, and it's a good person for you to know about and to read the books of. But I'm still going to make fun of his theory. Sorry about that. I only make fun of great theories. So over on this first part here, you see the idea is that the child somehow learns about a chair or a table or running. Those are my bad drawings. Sorry about that. But that's what those are supposed to be. And then once it's learned the concepts, it learns the labels. All right? So this is something that Fabio was just talking about, too. And again, I'm being somewhat facetious here because it's pretty hard to know how you would get the label of justice or phobia from just looking around the world. Not to mention, I was also joking from the beginning about running. So verbs are extremely hard, and the people who work on developmental linguistics have trouble understanding where verbs come from, too. How does an event start and end? But anyway, once you've got that, then what Terence Deacon says is what's special about us, because you can teach dogs words, right? So a lot of animals can learn a few words, but what's special about us is that we're able to use symbols and start generalizing across terms, and that's what makes humans particularly smart and why we have, laptop projectors and intercontinental video channeling, and no other species has anything like that. All right. So, as you know, I think people have already talked a little bit to you about this. Fabio, have they had a talk about large corpus semantics yet? No, okay. This was mentioned a bit by Craig this morning. Sorry?
No, so this is a good opportunity to
Mine is, okay.
2 minutes on large corpus semantics.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, Craig did mention it a little this morning. This is sort of what Google does, so where the root of Google's intelligence. So what's amazing, and here's some references, and I'll give you guys the slides if you don't already capture them, is that you can replicate human semantics just by making a machine look at a lot of words. A corpus is just a lot of words. Okay, in case you didn't know that. And so this is very cool, and it's exactly the opposite of what embodiment would predict. If you believe that you need embodiment to have intelligence, you wouldn't think that you could get semantics. Semantics means what do words mean. You wouldn't think you could get that from a corpus, just from words lying on a dictionary in a computer. Okay. The key here is it's not random words, it's words that in the order people would use them. So for example, newspaper articles or spoken language, okay? So what you do is for each word, you record what contexts you find it in, okay? And the context is obviously other words, that's all you have. A large corpus is only words. So you keep track of, and you don't keep track of everything because that would be impossible. It would take too much space. So you make a vector of 75 fairly frequent words. If you use the most frequent words, that would be things like the and. They're called close class words. Then you only get the syntax. So you can't use those. You use the next 75 most frequent words, and then you create a vector that of how frequently those 75 words occur with each of your target words that you're trying to understand, really understand what the meaning is. All right? So, yeah, basically meaning becomes a cosine in a 75-dimensional space. Really simple. It's hard to believe this stuff works. But it does. But before I can tell you that it does, I have to tell you how we know what humans, what are we going to test? If we're talking about science, we're talking about the experimental method, we have to have something to check against. So what we do is something called priming, a priming study. So you take a human, usually an undergraduate, you stick them in a room, and you flash a word on a screen. I think I have this. Yeah. So you flash one word on the screen, like lion, right? Like the animal, the lion. Okay, so you flash that word, but you flash it so fast that they don't actually read it and they can't consciously remember they've seen it. Again, human minds are amazing. This works. Right? Then you flash a collection of letters, which are either a word or a nonsense, just nonsense, just random letters. And you ask them whether it is a word or whether it's nonsense. All right? Now, if the word is, so say the word was lion that I primed with, and the next word is tiger. So if the two words are more close to meaning, then the subject is going to be able to tell that it's a real word faster. Okay? Now, if you think this is all really weird, then you need to think about semantic networks, right? Which is one of the theories of how we understand and how we focus our attention. So the idea is that once you have activated, you've got like a neural network with, lion is kind of partially triggered there, then there's already some energy around all the ideas associated with a lion. So Africa, tiger, all those kinds of things are also already have some energy. So you get to the threshold that you need to initiate action faster because you've already heard a word that was related. Does that make sense? Are you guys kind of happy with that? Yeah, okay, Nathan understands. Okay, good. Well, that's enough. All right. I hope so everyone understands. So this is one of the standard results from the 90s. This is where they're replicating a human semantic priming study. Okay, so this is work by McDonald and Lowe, but it's replicating, oh, geez, I left off the name. Well, anyway, I'll find the paper. Oh, I think it was on the previous slide. Yeah, Masadel, 1995. So these are the guys, Masadel are the ones who did the priming. And so here's some of the words, are black and white. Yeah, let's see. Here we go. Sailor and soldier, queen and king, brother and sister. So it looks a little random, but again, remember it was in a 75-dimensional space, and we've projected it here into 2 dimensions, okay? So the projection algorithm we use it sometimes has trouble getting there, but they actually measure the cosines, they don't measure 2-dimensional space, they measure the distance in the cosines, and they do replicate human semantics, so they get the same things clear. But you can see surprisingly large amounts, if you read the screen, about what words have managed to come up in sort of similar patterns. And even if I showed this to you in 3 dimensions, it would be more impressive than 2 dimensions, which is about, of course, all we can visualize. But unfortunately, I couldn't find that slide to show you that. All right, so this is group work that I did in my own group here with Audrey Bilovich. Some years ago, we were trying to replicate. Now, I'm going to have to skip this since I only have an hour. The detail, but there's some very famous stuff, work that's still going on. I cite 2003 here, but it's still very much in the news on implicit associations or implicit bias. So it has to do with racism, so very much in the news today, these days in America, and sexism. So we associate, in Western culture, we associate badness with, for example, the left hand, and goodness with the right hand. And well, you can ask about why that's true, but we do. And we can go through and we can find that, again, with this kind of reaction time, that it's much easier to go good, bad, than it is to go good, bad, all right? we have a much easier time associating those things, and so the reaction time comes faster. So again, it's more semantically close. So Bilovich and I decided to see if the same was true in large corpora, and we decided to look at whether the meanings of some words or these implicit meanings had changed over time. All right? So this is the result off of something called the British National Corpus. That's a huge collection of words. It's about 2 gig of words of ordinary British people talking to each other in sort of the 80s. They have funny accents, if you hear the audio version. And they also, it also has some written texts and stories and whatever. And we put in plurals. This is quite funny. We put in plurals because just to check it. So we thought woman and women should come up pretty close to each other, and God and gods, and good and bad, and dog and cat. We use dog because it's God backwards in English. You know, we were just playing around to make sure that words about the same length and about the same frequency that's not the bias. So if you look at this, yeah, men and man come up close, and they come up pretty close to women. And black and white are color terms. They're over on the side here. Dog, again, comes up with its plural. Left and right are less close to these other moral terms. Peace and war. It's kind of what you would expect. Okay, so that's the British National Corpus. So we couldn't think of a lot of old corpuses. You can tell I'm in a computer science department. So the thing we thought of was Shakespeare. The Bible, first of all, the Bible. So let's go back and look at the Bible. Well, in the Bible, animals are not moral actors, okay? So that's like totally not a thing to think in Judeo-Christian history. So there aren't any cats in the Bible, and the dogs are just, there's nothing to do with the other words. And similarly for the color terms, white and black are not moral terms in the Bible. But of course, it's a monotheistic religion, and I forgot that when we decided to try this. So you could see that gods, the plural gods, are the other, right? Because they're a monotheistic religion. Everybody else is polytheistic. So gods are over there with bad things like death and women. And the single God is over here with good things, well, good and evil, defining good and evil, but also with men. So you get, you're not of, well, anyway, this isn't that surprising. And then we went to Shakespeare, sorry, and you can see that Shakespeare, at least in England, the animals do become more like that they're migrating into being moral terms, and so are the color terms coming in. You already had Othello and things going on. You're getting the color terms in. The funny thing with Shakespeare is that there was a strong influence by the humanists from the Greek and Roman. So now God, the plural God and gods are close together again. And women are the good things in Shakespeare, but a single woman is usually the problem. So she's still down there with bad. but anyway, we didn't. That wasn't very scientific. It was actually only an undergraduate project. We didn't manage to replicate Banaji, but the nearest miss was Shakespeare. So then we thought, well, maybe the problem was we should have been looking at single author texts, which Shakespeare's almost single author. So now with a different undergraduate, we went through and did the same thing, only using the Enron corpus. And you doing that, we were able to find the Banaji stuff. So not all of it, but most of it. So life is associated with pleasant terms. Death is associated with unpleasant words. Elderly and youth didn't go exactly as we expected with Banaji with respect to pleasantness. So at least the people that worked at Enron, maybe because they were not very old or young, they were sort of 30-year-olds, were not particularly concerned about how unpleasant it was. But it did associate with competence the same way that Banaji had shown. And then there was sexism. So we could find implicit sexism in the Enron corpus, where male terms are associated with career and female terms are associated with family. So we have been able to find human-like biases from multiple forms in the corpus. So I think this undermines the original philosophical ideas of that. Well, undermining isn't quite the right word. I think it supplements. because we solve this problem about stuff you can't point to and where do you get the words from, because you learn what the words mean from hearing them, from hearing how they're used. So this solves one of the biggest problems that philosophy has been dealing with. Like I said, Quine is a genius. He's really well respected, and there's a lot of other people that have worked on this problem for centuries. And I think, again, you guys, if you like embodiment, you really might want to read this paper. It's kind of talking about how large corpus semantics interacts with the embodied theory. But the idea is that in parallel, children are learning concepts from their real lives, and they're learning how these things are connected. So remember, this is what this was the ultimate point in sort of the Terence Deacon hierarchy. I'm saying it's happening in parallel, just like our the rest of our perceptual systems. So I'm highly influenced also by the Brooksian kind of coming back. And then we start to learn connections, and that gives us power. And as we get older, we come to understand some of these terms in more than one way, and we get to use them better and better. But we can bootstrap even as children, right? Because we were able to learn semantics in a large corpus. And that also gives us hope for AI. So it means that robots, and we know this because Google is so good at finding the things that we just type in 3 words, and amazingly, it's very good at finding even noisy input. So Google does now what, when I was being taught about AI in the 90s, we were told no machine could do, like generalize over errors, like a database lookup. So now this is where I want the video. So you want to switch to video? I just want to show you the state of the art in case you haven't seen this. Have they seen the Watson videos already, Fabio?
Sorry?
Have they seen Watson before?
No.
No, okay, so you've got to see this if you haven't seen this. Okay, so go ahead, Nathan. All right, so
I'll take the
Will
Be Ud for 200.
11
so this is just the game. There's no AI here.
On a football field. Eli.
What is a huddle?
Right.
All right, so there's a weird cryptic clue. All you know is it's going to have UD in it and something about a football, and then someone comes up with it.
Actors who direct 800.
Okay, now, we don't have the sound on this.
Who's Denzel Washington?
You got him.
Actors who direct for 600, please.
The Pledge and Into the Wild. Ken.
Who is Sean Penn?
Right.
Okay, so stop now, Nathan. Sorry. So what this is Watson, the AI, playing against the 2 most amazing Jeopardy players. If you're not American, it's hard to understand. Jeopardy is, well, no, if you're British, probably every country has something like this. But Jeopardy started early in the days of television, and so the people who can solve these problems are looked down as geniuses, as celebrities. So 2 of the celebrity winners went up against an IBM computer that was trained by reading, for example, Wikipedia, the Urban Dictionary, and scientific papers and all kinds of things. So they trained it up, and now what you just saw was Watson completely failing to come up with the answers because it turns out that its processing takes a long time. So whether it does well or not depends on how long the question is. Because it reads the question immediately, and so while the humans are listening to the question, Watson is solving the answer. So let's go ahead and see it do a little better.
Olympic oddities for 1,000.
It was the anatomical oddity of U.S. gymnast George Iser who won a gold medal on the parallel bars in 1904. Ken.
What is he only had one hand?
No. Watson.
What is leg?
No. Brad. What is he's missing a leg? Ken, you select again.
Okay. I'm putting that in to show that they are really pedantic on this show. It isn't one leg, it's that you're missing one leg. Okay? Nevertheless, Watson won, despite these 2 problems I just told you about. So let's watch Watson do some winning.
Don't worry about it, all the way down at 2,000, Alex.
It's just acne. You don't have this skin infection, also known as Hansen's disease. Watson.
What is leprosy?
You are right.
Etude brute for 1,600.
Music fans wax rhapsodic about this Hungarian's transcendental etudes. Watson.
Who is Franz Liszt?
You are right.
Don't worry about it for 1,600.
You're just a little stiff. You don't have this painful mosquito-borne joint illness with a Swahili name. Watson?
What is dengue fever?
Dengue fever, correct.
Etude brute for 1200.
Paganini's 24 Capricci set the standard for etudes for this instrument. Watson?
What is violin?
Good.
2000, same category.
From 1911 to 1917, this romantic Russian composed Etude Tableau for piano. Watson?
Who is Rachmaninoff?
Rachmaninoff is correct, and that adds to your lead. You're at 13,400. Go again.
Don't worry about it for 1200.
You just need a little more sun. You don't have this hereditary lack of pigment. Watson?
What is albinism?
Good.
Cambridge for 1600.
Answer, Daily Double. What are you going to
Don't
wager?
ask why you get applauded for being
I'll
lucky.
wager $6,435.
I won't ask. I won't ask. Here's the clue
There's a
for you,
little
Watson.
grandstanding.
The chapels at Pembroke and Emmanuel colleges were designed by this architect.
Who is Sir Christopher Wren?
You are right, and that adds to your total. 21,035. Go again.
Surprised
The art of-
that a computer, it's no surprise that a computer can know more stuff than a person. But what is surprising is that it was able to access that information given those kinds of cues. And also, I don't know if any of you do natural language, but it was really, there was some showing off there when it said same category. That's actually one of the things that natural language has a lot of trouble with. So, so the point is, AI is there, and we have semantics, and that is what semantics is, okay? And you can get into weird arguments still, but by every definition of semantics, being able to use the right words at the right time means you understand, okay? So even though Watson is not embodied, it's not an android, it's able to mine our culture, but so are we. You can. I don't know if you have friends. I don't know if any of you are blind, but if you have friends that are blind, they use visual metaphors all the time. See you later. I'll look into it. We use these terms because we learn them from our culture. So somebody embodied at some point developed these concepts, but all of us can use it. That's why humans are amazing, because we can all use each other's knowledge. And now our machines can use our knowledge too. All right, so that's the main part of my lecture. Now I'm going to go into a couple things that are a little bit less kick butt than that, but they're still fun to talk about. So this is not actually my own roadmap, but it's good. This is a well-cited paper. It's actually about consciousness in game AI characters, not robots. All right? So I'm going to go through and talk about this. The idea is that consciousness isn't just one thing, but rather it's there's a set of capacities that people tend to associate with consciousness. All right? So I'm going to talk about the first three all in one because they're almost, just, I don't even remember, disembodied is like nothing. You're not conscious at all. There's no self and other. When you get to the point of isolated, there's at least self and other. It's like, water and land, very, very basic. Decontrolled is the first thing we can really understand. A decontrolled is when you have a robot and it's sitting there, but you haven't connected any of the electronics. So it's a robot with maybe even has sensors, but they're not connected to the CPU. So these are the least conscious things you can imagine in AI. All right? Reactive is when you take sensing and put it into action. And I would at that point say that something is intelligent. I am happy to say that plants are intelligent because they perceive which of their leaves get the sun, and then they drop the other leaves, right? So that is action from sensing. So that's the most basic kind of intelligence. It isn't really what most people call conscious. Okay, then there's the special thing, which is learning. When you can learn, it's considered better. But actually, almost anything can learn. Even amoebas can learn. We make too big a deal out of this in AI. Again, we don't pay much attention to actual science. Okay, this is the point where I would start to get happier about consciousness. Attention. You can't be conscious until you can be unconscious. So actually, machines like your own laptops, these computers, learn and they respond, but well, they sort of have attention, right? They have something that's on the screen right now. But this is when we really start talking about the fact that there's some things that we don't have access to in our own minds. We don't know why we blush. There's things we wish we hadn't said, right, that we blurred out. There's the fact that we don't have access to some of the processes in our own minds, probably for boring reasons of, computational complexity, maybe for more interesting reasons. That's what fascinates us about the stuff we do have access to, right? The stuff that we can linguistically describe. All right. So now we're going back into the paper. This is about having multiple goals you have to switch between. Now, I don't know if I would prioritize that, if it was my paper, if I would prioritize that above 4. But anyway, it's another level of unconsciousness that you're only attending to one goal at a time, makes you more conscious of that goal. Again, the paper says that you're not human-like until you have emotions, but we know that animals have emotions too. So I'm not sure about that and the ordering, but it's true. It's certainly true that these are two things associated by some people with consciousness. If you ask, and I do this a lot, I give talks in pubs and things, if you ask ordinary people, what do you think consciousness is? They mostly describe self-awareness, okay? So, and here again, we see it ranked above emotionality. I think this is, you don't need, you can be conscious without self-consciousness. I think you see that in a lot of animals. They don't know that they're an example of the dog species. And in fact, a lot of dogs think they're people, right? But they don't have a good self-concept, but they share a lot of what we think is conscious. But anyway, again, back to the paper that I'm describing, the authors consider then the next thing empathy, which is basically knowledge of others, is a higher consciousness. Then social is knowledge of the other's knowledge of yourself, right? And it keeps going this way. This is a bit funny, but it's a great paper, but the most human-like thing to them is being able to use the internet to extend your mind. So I guess humans weren't humans before 1960. But and then finally, they hypothesized that there might be something superconscious, which is even further. That if you could have multiple streams, and they hypothesize AI can do this, but humans can't. Okay. You could also say that, for example, governments are superconscious if you wanted to under these definitions. So I use this roadmap just to get some of the terms across. Okay, this talk was originally, I was asked to be give my own talk, but I want to again push this into at least thinking about this is a hypothesis, unlike the stuff before. But what if we're building robots and they're walking around and they're talking and they're already doing this? How do we know if they're conscious or not, right? What does it even mean for it to be conscious? And what do we build consciousness in as? What is the point? I think that consciousness is a special kind of attention, right? So there's a huge literature, and lots of people mean lots of different things. But I think it's basically the name for the feeling we have when we're evaluating chains of actions with intermediate outcomes. So it's basically something we need in order to learn new plans or to discover new plans. Again, by a system of priming. That's part of the reason I put the semantics part before. You can think about that you have a bunch of actions you could take. Clearly, consciousness has something to do with action selection, but this is about which plan will we take. So a lot of people think you need to have language in order to be conscious. I don't believe that, but I do think that language helps us be conscious of more, because language is part of our cultures discovering the terms that are most useful for getting mental work done, right? We find the concepts, we give them names, and then we share them with each other. And so every little kid, when they hear a word, they try to figure out what that word means. So again, it makes it a massive parallel search for the most useful ways to reason. Okay? And self-consciousness is just one of those concepts. All right, so what do we have to do if we put it into artificial intelligence? I think we only have this problem. Remember, consciousness is defined by unconsciousness. So we only have this problem if we're bottlenecked for cognitive resources. We know humans are. We can only attend to a few things at a time. Google isn't, right? Google just has massive numbers of computers. So does AI need to be, in general, do you need AI to ever have bottlenecks? Well, maybe with a robot, if you can only look at one thing at a time, something like that, then you might need something like this, okay? But then what should you be conscious of? You should be, if you're trying to learn about everything, if you're trying to learn to be the optimal actor, how do you know what you should look at? Again, if you're used to thinking about Bayesian things, well, stuff that you are doing right now is probably stuff you're going to need to do in the future. And stuff that you don't know how to do very well is probably stuff you need to think more about, that you'd like to get more certain about. If you're certain about the action, you don't need to be conscious of it. And that's why we can do things reflexively once we learn them really well. Okay? So the point of intervention then is that you do action selection as you would usually, but then you inhibit the actual expression of the action. So once you've got the action you think is most useful, you start updating your models and looking around and trying to perceive more about that task. If something new becomes salient, that's insight. This is actually Herbert Simon made this point a couple decades ago. And so you can basically flush your plan and start over if you suddenly realize that you have a new model. But otherwise, you may update the models without having an immediate impact on your behavior. And we see this in a lot of psychology results, that the people who are aware of the task and understand the structure of the task and can describe it behave exactly the same as the people who never noticed, even with learning tasks. So you can implicitly learn something, never get an explicit model, and you perform exactly the same. So now, how many people now think that I'm right about consciousness? Nobody. Oh, Nathan, hurrah! Okay, great. Thank you, Nathan. That can't be right, because that would be bad, right? There's got to be more to consciousness than that. There must be some reason robots can't be conscious. I don't know. I think, why is it bad? Why are we so worried about Rod Brooks used to ask us about the COG project. Why is it that people are happy to call these ridiculous things a robot hand or robot feet, but they get really unhappy if you talk about a robot brain, even a brain, right? So why are we unhappy about robot consciousness? I love this cartoon. I think the thing, there's an elephant in the room. Do you have this expression in your English? The elephant in the room is ethics. And I think we confuse action selection with ethics, and you don't want to do that. They're two different things, okay? But ethics is itself important, and so that's why that's the third topic of my talk. How much time have I got left, Fabio?
Well, say a few minutes.
A few minutes, okay. I'll try to go through this quickly. I think part of the reason, and remember at the beginning I was talking about people that thought you owe ethical obligation. I think people want to make AI they owe obligations to. They want to be able to create an equal that they have perfect dominion over, that they own, But let's talk about where does ethics come from. As I said, ethics is how we regulate our sociality. It's how we decide how to spend our time. They presumably co-evolve with our sociality. So the sociality involves both coexistence with individuals and identity as a group. Okay, so it's always that a society is defined in terms of other societies, as well as keeping people from, struggling too much against each other. So you're working with your society and against other societies typically, right? Unless you can create a society of societies, and then the societies collaborate too. So again, is does not imply ought. I'm not saying we can't build a better world. I'm talking about what does the world look like without much thought. The point is that AI ethics relates to two different types of human artifact, the ethical system and the robot. So a lot of people say, do we have ethical obligation to a robot? That's not a scientific question. There's no way to go out and say, what should we do, or what is the fact of the matter. Rather, we get to choose, because both we can make the robots and decide if they're the kinds of things that we should be obliged to, and we can make the ethical system. We can legislate and say, what should the robots do, okay? So we could make it either so that we owe robots the ethical obligation or we don't owe them. Either one could be true, and that's a moral and humanities decision. It's not a scientific just describing the way the world exists. Again, lots of people have trouble getting that difference straight. because I'm almost out of time and I do have another meeting, I'm just going to go really quickly through this. I apologize, but I have entire web pages on it, and you can find a long version of this online. But that's what I just said. It's a normative question, not a descriptive question. So it's the utility and displacement and responsibility we as authors have onto AI. That's how I would phrase it about whether or not the robot can be responsible for itself, right? Rather than asking whether the robot can be responsible for itself, we say, should we make the robot responsible for its own actions? All right. So I think, unfortunately, I'm going to skip over this. The main point is that, as I already said, that morality is defined by a society. So it would be unfair. I think we could easily build this kind of thing into a robot. And I think it also describes the situation we observe with pets and monkey societies and things like that. So it's nothing special to humanity. Again, read Franz de Waal if you want more about that kind of thing. But we have to decide, if we're trying to decide whether or not to make robots responsible for their actions, we need to think both our society and the robot society. I don't see a lot of good advantages to making the robots moral subjects, things that we're responsible for or that are responsible for themselves. And I see a lot of problems. People can convince others that they have obligations they don't have to waste money and to waste time. We've seen that kind of thing happen. And I'm particularly worried about in the weapons, the military scenario. So if you blame the robot for blowing up a village rather than blaming the person that commissioned the robot. So that's why I got particularly active in this myself, is because of what's happening right now with battlefield robots. But anyway, that's my opinion. Like I said, this isn't science, this is philosophy, and so this is something that a society has to describe. But I just want to remind you, a lot of people, especially a lot of geeks, really care about the robot perspective. But I don't see any advantage to the robots of being made into moral patients, at least not now. No currently existing robot would be benefited or would have any awareness of the fact that it was being made a moral subject. And if we did actually make them into things that we gave rights, like we give rights to people, then we'll start competing with them, right? So I don't really understand why we should get into that situation. I think it makes more sense to keep the robots as things that we can that we don't owe ethical obligations, which includes things like just backing up their minds. I'm not saying we can't make them interesting. I'm saying that we have to make them safe, so we don't have to worry about them, and for their own benefit as well as for our benefit. All right. So the quick summary of that is that the issue of where do robots fit into our society is not predetermined. It's not something we need to discover. It's something we need to decide. It's a question for the humanities. And we need to, I don't see personally that there's any benefit to organizing our societies such that AI is a moral agent or patient. Yeah, I guess I made it clear. But let's go back to this talk. I'm just going to say I didn't go much into the moral obligations. I only talked about the context of robots. We are doing more work in understanding morality in human societies, and if you want, you can Google that, or click on. You can't click on it, huh? But you get the idea. But anyway, I did talk about large corpus semantics, and I did talk about consciousness, which is something people used to think you couldn't do, and we could actually have intelligent conversations about that. And large corpus semantics works. We can prove that it's just like human semantics. All right. So artificial intelligence exists. So the corollary from the scientific perspective is that intelligence is not supernatural. It's not magic. It's not going to take over the world. Plants have it. Robots have it. It's not a big deal. Okay. I mean, it's cool, but it's not going to destroy us in itself. Now, the normative corollary is that it's not just intelligence that makes humanity special. We need to think more about why we've set up our ethical systems the way we have, and we need to understand ourselves better in order to understand AI better, in order to not say and do crazy things. Okay, and yeah, respect the humanities, fund the humanities, don't diss them too much. All right, so thanks to all my students, one of whom just graduated yesterday, so I crossed him out. And if you were interested in that AI stuff at the end, Dave Gunkel and I just had a special issue in March of this year on that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
citation.
It's very late, but I think we can take a couple of questions if people ask questions, as I think they may have.
Okay, I'm going to try turning up the sound, even though it risks feedback. Okay. Are there no questions, or am I not hearing?
No, so far no questions.
Come on. You can ask Fabio questions too.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Yona. Thanks for your talk.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a doubt after your talk. So
only one. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Let's say one. You consider these conscious machines as a subset of intelligent machines, or in the other way? And what's the characteristics for an intelligent machine in comparison with a conscious machine?
Yeah, I actually have another paper that goes a little more detail about that. But yes, a subset. It's a small subset, but it doesn't deserve extra ethical obligation. It just has to do with, do you have modular intelligence? So is there only one subset of things you're currently using and you're currently learning from? So do you have episodic memory that you consolidate your behavior from? And are you only focusing on part of your intelligence at one time? Then that's sufficient for consciousness by the description that, not the description those guys with the roadmap had, but the description that I was giving along the top of that. So if you want that paper, it's called Crude, Cheesy, Second-Rate Consciousness. And that's actually a quote from Dan Dennett, in case you're wondering why I have a crazy title. But again, it goes back to, it's a straw man. I know it's a straw man, but it's trying to get us to think by, why are we so excited about the term consciousness? Why do we think that that's the point of morality? If I would claim that those robots are as much conscious as a gripper is a hand, okay? A human hand is so much more than any robot gripper, but we're happy to talk about robot hands, and we're not happy to talk about robot consciousness. I don't think we should make conscious that special. I think we should find something that does rudimentary things and say, okay, that's conscious. It's not magic. Let's have a real talk about human values and human society, and not just look for magic patterns that occur in the, in V1 that indicate that, that stuff is lit up and that's something we owe. Or I also am a Tononi skeptic, if anyone's into that stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So other questions or? No, I have a question about large corpus semantics.
Okay.
So, how you, just speculating, how you would relate a large corpus semantics to embodiment?
Fortunately, I have a whole paper about that. That's one of my favorites and doesn't get cited enough, so you should read it. It's called Embodiment versus Memetics. But the point is that definitely we acquire a huge amount of information from being embodied and experiencing the world. So I don't know if you guys know this. I was on the COG project in its first year. So like, in fact, the first year and a half. But I got thrown off because I couldn't help build the robot fast enough. But the, we were reading Lakoff and Johnson, which is a book called Metaphors We Live By. And the idea is that, for example, you can't understand life because you only experience it once. So, but you do understand path. You learn about path when you're 2 and you're trying to get from where you are to where you want to be. And so then you understand life and career and things like that based on a metaphor to path. So definitely, I think our physical experience informs some of the concepts and makes us better understand, literally ground our understanding. But I do think that we get some level of understanding from the semantics, that we just absorb it because it's a means of transmitting information. which is, again, that's why we're so smart. That's what's so amazing about humans, that we can get stuff from language. You know, I could tell you something about fighting the war in Vietnam without having even been alive when that war was going on. But of course, I don't understand it to the same extent as someone who actually was in Vietnam during that period. But at the same time, I probably understand some things they don't, because they didn't have the knowledge when they were looking and observing and perceiving and feeling. So I think these two things come together and they interact, and they're two of many modules of intelligence.
Okay, thank you. No, actually, I have many questions, but maybe I will ask you.
Yeah, some other time. Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
bring me to Italy. That would be fun.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's thank again the speaker.
Guys, I'm on Twitter. My email, I'm behind, but if you can think of a question in 140 characters, feel free to tweet it at me. I'm pretty good about replying.
Okay, very good. So please take this opportunity, everybody. Okay, thank you again.
Thank you, Javier.
I think we can conclude here.